Hi, I'm Marley Sung. Thank you for giving me this time to present today. I'm here to talk about what I think is an exciting, promising, emerging approach um, that uses methyl methamphetamine, more commonly known as MDMA, in MDMA assisted psychotherapy, specifically for treatment-resistant PTSD in veterans. That's going to be the focus today of how that psychotherapy can be used. So, if you want to join me for a moment and looking at learning outcomes. So there's some really basic ones, right? Like, what is PTSD? Most of us will be pretty familiar with that. What is MDMA? How does it work? What is MDMA assisted psychotherapy? What clinical research supports this claim that MDMA assisted psychotherapy has efficacy for treatment-resistant PTSD in veterans? We'll be looking at why clinical MDMA is not synonymous with the recreational drugs known as ecstasy and Molly. They're very often, there's an equivalence made there. And if you can stick around to the end, you get the secret sauce bonus learning. So, to get started, let's jump right in. What is PTSD? So most of us here have a pretty good idea of what PTSD I'll hit some quick points again. It's a serious debilitating condition arising in some people after exposure to or experiencing of traumatic events. The DSM-5 diagnostic criteria basics are that you have to have the core symptoms which have persisted for more than 1 month after the traumatic event, and the symptoms cause significant distress or impairment. Core symptoms include intrusive thoughts and memories, negative effects on cognition and mood, and hyperarousal and reactivity. There are several comorbidities. It can be diagnosed alone, but more commonly occurs with substance abuse disorder, mood disorder, or anxiety disorders. And this is a problem. There's a lifetime prevalence rate estimated nearly 4% globally and over 8% in the US. So that's sort of the general. There's a lot more to be said about PTSD. There's complex PTSD, there's different types, but that's what you'll need to know for today. The PTSD impacts. PTSD is strongly associated with functional difficulties, substantially reduced quality of life, and adverse physical health outcomes. As you see in the list there, I'm going to hit a couple in particular. Increased work sick days, elevated suicide risk, high cost healthcare utilization, 34.9 billion in inflation adjusted charges for hospitalizations from 2002 to 2011. And of course, all the diminished cognitive and psychosocial functioning that you would expect, plus fractured relationships, which means you're impacting others, family systems, wives, husbands, partners. So it goes beyond the individual, always into the community and into the family. Looking from PTSD in general to PTSD and military populations, research has shown particularly high rates of PTSD in military populations. It's 13 to 30% compared to the general population of 6 to 8%. Given that almost 3 million US military personnel were deployed to the Middle East and surrounding territories since 2001, there's a demand for effective treatment. It's really critical. And I want to talk for a moment about Vermont and military populations in particular. I'm going to start with a story of Josh Pelota from Burlington, Vermont. Typical case. He's age 20, he joins the Vermont National Guard. He scored so high in the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Test that he could choose whatever branch in the military he wanted. He opted for infantry. He's been described as a teddy bear type who enjoyed snowboarding, football, and lacrosse. Great sense of humor that made everyone want to be around him, that sort of energy that pulls people in, natural leader. But things changed after he lost 2 members of his unit in a Taliban ambush in Afghanistan. At 21, it was the biggest loss in his life. He came back to Vermont a few months later. First, he was okay. He was working as a transportation security officer at Burlington International Airport, but then problems began to crop up. He was having a hard time sleeping, which led to those missed work days, which led to being fired. In September 2014, he ended his life. He was 25. His mom says, "This is the worst thing to ever happen to me. I will never have grandchildren. He was my only child. I will never see my child get married and have kids." And this is a picture of Josh during his time in Afghanistan. So, is this an unusual story? It's not. The Department of Veterans Affairs says that there's 43,000 vets in Vermont, and that doesn't include active service members. There were 25 veteran suicides in Vermont in 2016, a rate of 56.8 per 100,000 people, and the state's rate is 88.7% higher than the national rate. So PTSD in veterans and active duty service members is a problem in Vermont, and it's a problem that's killing people and devastating families. So let's take a minute to look at, well, what are the current treatment options? No one takes the gold. There is no gold standard that I found that was where the experts agree. There's either a pharmacotherapy approach or trauma-focused psychotherapies. So most people do seem to be leaning towards the trauma-focused psychotherapies. But if you do go with pharmacotherapy, there is first-line treatment of SSRIs and SNRIs. Sertraline and paroxetine are the only FDA-approved drugs for PTSD, right? But then we get to our trauma-focused psychotherapies, and the first-line treatment there, they're considered to be quite effective often. Cognitive processing therapy, which is CBT, tailored to PTSD, EMDR, MBSR or MBCT, which is mindfulness-based approaches, and prolonged exposure therapy. So great, we have some first-line treatments, right? But there's some issues and barriers to these current treatments for PTSD. For the pharmacotherapy, it's ineffective for many individuals with PTSD. An estimated 40 to 60% of patients aren't responding adequately. As usual, you have side effects, you have compliance issues, and people are going to be on medication probably for many years, if not lifelong. So there we have our trauma-focused psychotherapies, and there's issues here because of access, especially in rural and poor communities. You're not necessarily going to have access to all those therapies we were talking about before. The dropout rate can range from 28 to 68%. It's not useful if it ain't happening, right? And why is that dropout rate so high? Well, the treatments can be pretty hard to tolerate, especially the prolonged exposure therapy. This whole game is to not remember and to avoid, right? So going to places where they have to re-experience things that are so painful is not really something that people want to necessarily be doing. It's a lot of time, and time is money. If you don't have the time to spend going to counseling every week, then you're not going to do it. And it's still ineffective for many, even if they get past the access issues and actually don't drop out. It's not going to be effective for everyone. So the good news is there's a novel, promising approach, which is the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. In this treatment, MDMA is administered with psychotherapy in up to 3 monthly 8-hour sessions. Participants are prepared for these sessions beforehand and process material arising from the sessions in follow-up integrative psychotherapy sessions. So to be clear, this is not a medication that you're being given a prescription for, taking home, and then taking every day. You're going to psychotherapy, and when you're there, you're going to do 3 sessions over a month that are going to be sort of special because you're going to be there for like 8 hours, and you're going to take a medicine that enhances the effectiveness of that psychotherapeutic experience. So this is actually a novel approach in sort of the paradigm of treatment, it really could be called, it's a merger of psychopharmacology and psychotherapy in a way that we haven't necessarily seen before. Again, I want to emphasize the scope of current research can support this approach only for treatment-resistant PTSD in vets. That is what the clinical trials have been designed to show, and that is indeed what they've shown. There may be other uses, and there definitely are promising other areas, but we can't make the claims about that yet. In general, what is MDMA? It's a ring-substituted phenylethylamine, which is structurally related to amphetamines. So that's in the name, right? And like amphetamines, it's a synthetic substance that does not exist in nature. Interestingly, it's classified as an enactogen in the Merck Index, which we'll get to in a moment. Again, in a class of its own. MDMA possesses a unique pharmacodynamic profile in humans that includes increased emotional empathy, an increase in feelings of interpersonal closeness, increased ability to tolerate distressing memories, right? This all sounds great and exactly what you would be looking for to treat PTSD. So why is it out everywhere? Why am I not offering a training on how to do this and some samples? Well, MDMA got a nasty reputation at one point. It was first synthesized in 1912 by Merck, and then it was discovered in the early 1970s to enhance effects of psychotherapy. So they were on track. It also got discovered in the 80s to enhance effects of recreational social group gatherings, sometimes known as partying. So although MDMA is distinct from ecstasy and Molly, it was an agent in it. Now it's important to realize that, but when I say distinct from, when you've got a recreational street drug, you don't know what dosage of MDMA is actually in there. You don't know if there's any. It could be pure PCP, right? And so there's a difference sort of in the clinical presentation of the medication itself. In a lab, when it's being given in a clinical setting, this is MDMA that has nothing else in it. They know exactly how much you're getting, and they can regulate that. So it's essentially a very unregulated version, and you don't even know. It's not at all an equivalent. It would be like saying that if someone was given Zoloft and then someone took that, chopped it up, spread it out into little pills and gave it to people, that those little other things were Wellbutrin. Nobody would think that, right? So this is not ecstasy, it's clinical MDMA. But because of that equivalence and because people were getting scared about it, it was classified as a Schedule I controlled substance, which made its use in therapy illegal and created obstacles to clinical research. Not as much obstacle to its use on the recreational scene, but it really shut down the clinical research. Let's look at MDMA in a moment. As I said, it's in a class of its own. There's 3 classes of psychedelic drugs. One is the serotonergic hallucinogens, which include DMT. Some people may know this as what's sometimes called the God molecule or the spirit molecule. It is, again, very popular in certain circles where they like to take consciousness expanding drugs and engage. Again, it's, often led by like a shaman, and that's not to say that that wouldn't be a valid method of creating some sort of healing experience. We just can't claim it as a clinically proven model, right? We don't know actually, they haven't done those kinds of rigorous trials for us to know. Another DMT is also in ayahuasca, which has gained a lot of popularity. It's a South American brew that, again, people are certainly looking for something. That these are not like fun party drugs. This isn't like drink a beer and hang out. This is like vomit and, experience really unusual states of self. It seems worthwhile to research why people are interested. What is it offering? But again, that's not the focus of our conversation today. It's a very different use of it. Psilocybin LSD, and mescaline, all serotonergic hallucinogens. Then we have our second class, psychedelic or dissociative anesthetics, and the ones that you may know are PCP and ketamine. Both of those classes are separate from what we are known as enactogens, and really it's kind of MDMA. There's some related compounds, but mostly it's interesting because of the MDMA. So how does this enactogen, MDMA, actually enhance psychotherapy? There's hypothesis that the therapeutic action includes things like enhanced fear extinction, right? Memory reconsolidation, enhanced therapeutic alliance, and widening the window of tolerance for distressing thoughts. Again, exactly what, if you were going to come up with a miracle drug for PTSD, that kind of sounds like it, right? And in a way, I think it would be right to call this client-assisted psychotherapy. It's a medication that's assisting the client to experience psychotherapy in a way that is more beneficial for them, because it sort of gets past barriers to a psychotherapy being effective. Therapeutic alliance, if someone has spent years developing as a sort of habit of thought and emotion to be closed off, to hide things, if they're experiencing deep shame, if they feel that if they open their mouths and something came out like, I got afraid and my friends died and I was supposed to be in charge, right? Is that like, what does it take to hold that in? And how do you get past someone wanting to undress themselves like that in front of you? It disinhibits. It allows people to find a hard way of being brave a little bit easier, I think. Next, we can look at the mechanism of action of clinical MDMA. It stimulates release of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine, and may act directly on some adrenergic, cholinergic, and serotonergic receptors. Also elevates levels of the neurohormone oxytocin. This is a party drug. You can see why they were like, hey, this should be a party drug. That pretty much hits everything we feel good, makes us feel good. Next you have, if you're interested, this sort of milestones from the history of MDMA and the origins of it. But I think we're going to go to now looking at the studies that support the efficacy of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for trauma-resistant PTSD in veterans. So quickly, the first two studies, which is the first controlled clinical study, Appendix 1 gives you more information about that if you're interested. That's when they were first able to study it in a clinical trial again. 2004 to 2017, they were running phase 2 clinical trials. Again, see Appendix 2 if you're interested in the details of that. Then it got really exciting. In 2017, there was a study that compared data used for the approval of paroxetine and sertraline and pulled data from phase 2 studies, demonstrated that MDMA-assisted psychotherapy constitutes a substantial improvement over the available pharmacotherapies in terms of safety and efficacy. That led to the breakthrough therapy designation being granted by the FDA, which now brought that BTD status has expedited the development of phase 3 trials, multi-site, large-scale, occurring worldwide, leading up to a planned submission seeking FDA approval by 2021. So there's advantages, like I mentioned, to the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. If we focus on that 2017 study for a minute, we can see that it showed the substantial improvement in terms of safety and efficacy. There was lower dropout rates compared to sertraline and paroxetine. People like MDMA. And because it's only administered under direct observation during a limited number of sessions, right? 3 sessions we're talking about. There is little chance of diversion or accidental or intentional overdose or withdrawal symptoms upon discontinuation. So that is sort of the brings us to really the end of this discussion. Hopefully you have learned the basics of PTSD and MDMA and what the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is. So I'm going to give you a takeaway challenge. If you look there, you'll see that this is from military.com. And there's a headline, MDMA therapy gaining popularity as PTSD treatment. Are there issues with this article? I've given you multiple choice options. If there are issues, would it be A, the term MDMA therapy, B, calling this a PTSD treatment, C, the image caption that implies MDMA is equivalent to ecstasy, or D, nothing, it rocks, because this is a website used by veterans, active duty military, and their family members, and it is destigmatizing a holistic novel approach to treatment for PTSD and psychotherapy in general. So, anyone have any ideas about which of these three you might choose? A? Okay. No. Well, let's say A, B, and C have problems. The bonus points are really for why. And the term MDMA therapy is incorrect. It's used a lot. That implies that you're taking a drug, the drug is enacting some sort of benefit on its own. That's not the case. Without the psychotherapy, you have no treatment. And I want to distinguish it there quickly from, say, buprenorphine, which is used for opioid dependence and is and when it's offered, it has to be offered with counseling, right? So, but that's really wraparound therapy. That's like, take this medicine for your opioid addiction, take this counseling, which will augment, right? You're getting to a well physical state, healthy mental state, better regulation, and these different components will work together to create a better, healthier you, right? That's not what's happening. This is not medication and therapy being brought together for synergistic effect of treatment. This is therapy that is self-enhanced in the moment by a drug that's being administered. So there's real distinction there. And when you say MDMA therapy, it implies that it's actually the MDMA doing the work when it's the client doing the work. So this is not a PTSD treatment yet. It is currently a treatment that is available, that has been shown to be useful for treatment-resistant PTSD in vets. That's as far as we can go responsibly in making claims. And then, of course, we know that MDMA is not the same as ecstasy. So if you've made it this far, you have made it to the point where you get the MDMA secret sauce bonus round. So, if nothing else, you can learn how the hell do I say methylene dioxymethamphetamine and sound cool when I'm talking about this with my friends. So, it's actually, as you can see here, it's a very easy word to say, in fact. You can say methyl, you can say methamphetamine, you can say dioxy. When you say dioxy, think of daikon radish. So it's not like die, it's like die. You sort of breathe it out a little. Daikon, dioxy. Yeah, actually try to get yourself in a whole little MDMA state saying it. So methylene dioxymethamphetamine. The ENA, which is really the only unusual part, is ENA. So let's say it together. Are you ready? Methyl ENA dioxymethamphetamine, MDMA. There you go. Thank you all for giving me your time and attention. I hope it's been helpful. I hope it will be helpful for those you serve. Thank you.